Recording in progress.
Welcome back to The Broken Brain, everybody. It's me, Dwight, your host for this episode. All episodes, actually, I'm hosting. I've had co-hosts, but I've never had someone else completely host. Well, that's a good idea. I'm going to write that down and take that out before someone steals it. No podcast has done that before. So, well, I'm super excited today to be able to welcome Jocelyn Jones onto the program. And one of the things that I like, we were just saying this as we were setting up to get ready, that meeting people is something you like about talking about your work and your book. And that's also the same for me when it comes to podcasting is meeting interesting people who have been through a lot and also who have done a lot. I'll say here, to have you on, I mean, you're an actor, you're an author. We're going to talk about your new book. You're a teacher and a trainer for actors. You're a speaker. You go out and engage with people. I mean, engaging with people is really what you do, right? That's your whole thing.
It is. It is what I do.
And I'll tell everybody out there to go, hey, we've had a few guests before who have an active IMDb presence, but people should go look you up on there. We've had a few, but it's not all, because we're doing a lot of clinicians and stuff. But I also love to have artists and creators on the show, as anyone who listens knows. And I think one of the things that's going to come up today, I predict, is the crossover between embracing the inner artist, as you advocate, and a lot of these same things that we would do in a clinical setting to buoy up somebody's stability or adjustment and help work through some things. And that's one of the things I found fascinating. We're going to be talking a lot about the book Artist, Awakening the Spirit Within, which is your book. I'm going to hold it up to the camera for those the patrons of the show get to see the video of our thing. So I think it's backwards on the video, so you can all hold it up to a mirror while you're watching. Phones make that easier to do. But what is it? When did it come out? I got a gift copy from your I don't know, publisher. Somebody sent it to me. So I don't know. Is it out now or is it?
It's out now. It was published on February 2nd, 22 in the year 22. So I liked all those twos lined up.
That's good. That was clever. You got the 22.
Yeah. I didn't realize that all books come out on Tuesdays. I didn't realize that Tuesday is publishing date. And if you publish a book, it's going to come out on some Tuesday. And so when I was talking to my publishers and they were saying, we could do it this date or this date, and they came up with 2/22, and I went, yes, it's 2 days before my birthday, and 22 is a master number. It kind of goes with the book. I like the whole thing.
Well, now everybody knows when to send a card next year. So if everybody caught that, make sure to schedule it, calendar that for your birthday next year.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited to get into it. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and what your work has been, and what led you to write this book and some of the things it's about.
Okay, good. Well, I was raised in an artist community up in the Hudson River Valley, of which there are many. It's a known area for Woodstock and Nyack, and there's a lot of different artist communities up there. And I was raised in a little alcove of 18th century houses on the Hudson that has, had extraordinary artists have lived there since the 20s, really, because it's 30 minutes outside Manhattan. So you can live in the country, in the woods. My house was surrounded by woods. I played in the river and the woods, and then be in the city, for all the cultural events. Or, my father was an actor. He was in the theater. Before we moved to Sneden's Landing, it's called. We lived in New Hope, Pennsylvania, on the Delaware River. So it's always been a river. The Delaware River went to the Hudson River.
I grew up in Harrisburg, so I liked when I read in your book that you were in Pennsylvania. I was like, oh, good, tie in there.
Yeah, I have a special place in my heart for Pennsylvania and Bucks County. And my dad was doing Broadway. He was on Broadway, and he was commuting from New Hope to New York. And at that particular time, which was in the 50s, it took him over 2 hours to get there. So he was anxious to move someplace closer to New York and found this wonderful community. The dinner table, we lived in that house for 60 years. And so I was raised with these artists at the dinner table, painters and dancers and choreographers and writers and actors and, even political people, Mike Wallace was our neighbor, and he would come to dinner. And I loved Mike. I liked him so much, but he was forbidden for talking about politics at the dinner table because, Anyway, I sort of studied these artists. I had a real interest in their process. They would talk about their process and their relationship to art and what that was. And from a young age, I noticed when they were working on a piece, whether they were painting, whether they were writing, whether they were acting, whether they were choreographing, when they were actively working on a piece, they were lit. They were different. I saw them when they were working and I saw them when they weren't working. And when they were working, they were lit up. And I wanted to know what that was about. And I discovered really that I had this high interest and inspiration and how to call upon it at will. And so my teaching was really more about that. I mean, I do deliver an acting technique. I think an acting teacher has to give you a technique or they're not you have to be able to take something and use it, So I do teach technique, but the technique became, as I got older, I got more and more interested in the spiritual aspects of inspiration and of art and how to call upon that inspiration at will. And so I started honing the technique so that because actors will tell you, when they're searching for a part, they're searching for a character, they'll ask questions. And when you have a good idea, any artist with a good idea, that aha moment is like, oh, and your heart beats a little faster and your stomach turns over and you're kind of on to something. And so I wanted actors to be able to work with questions that would and wait for responses and not take the first response because it was intellectually smart. It may sound great. It would be impressive to talk about, but it did make your heart beat fast. So that means there's a better choice there. I think great acting, great art is making great choices. And I think great choices come from great questions. So that was the honing of the teaching. And I got to an age, I've been doing it for so long, I would just say, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. This is a little spiritual. You may not feel it's, the right place, but it's what keeps me teaching. So if you want to keep me teaching, this is what I'm interested in for you. And of course, they really responded to it. And then I started thinking about the world and the fact that, and young people, it's interesting to take a look at young people and their thoughts and their feelings about their future. And I really discovered there'd been a shift from the time that I grew up when the world was our oyster. And, we had this extraordinarily healthy middle class and everyone believed that if they worked hard enough, they could have a dream. They could work out their dream. And that kind of disappeared. And I got interested in why did that disappear? What happened here? And I think, it's pretty obvious that it began with screens, I remember seeing my teenage daughter, very young when we would have a boy call us, it'd be like, oh my God, he called us on the phone. And it was so exciting. And then you get on the phone and the boy would go, and you would go, because you didn't really know how to talk to each other. And you were nervous as hell, but it was still a very successful exchange.
It's almost like I've been that boy in the past.
Yeah. And yet it was so delicious and delightful, and it woke you up. And it had possibility, it held possibility. Maybe he will talk to me in school. Maybe he will ask me to the movies. Maybe all these possibilities came. And then when my daughter turned about 13 or 14, I noticed they don't call. They, at the time, messaged. And they don't have those moments on the phone. They don't date. They don't, I don't know what they do. They go to the mall together. But a part of what they do is talk about who they like. So then that's all about influencers, Oh, did you see this? And did you see that? But there was no sense of self. There was no sense of, I'm in the world and I have this drive. Of course, you meet young people who have beautiful drive. I think we have a 25-year-old congressman. I think that's pretty great.
Yeah.
And, I think that this next generation is really looking at their responsibilities in politics and such. But I want them to have a dream. So my premise for the book is really that there is an artist in everyone. And I could just prove that by saying your life is your first masterpiece. We don't come to the planet and come to life and get carefully raised up or uncarefully raised up and banged around in order to just be influenced by things. We need to really, I went off there because I started thinking about, well, we used to be influenced by books, but it's different, in reading, it engages your imagination. Like, for instance, that's why I think, Dwight, we have such a problem with illiteracy today, because, people are looking at screens. The pictures are delivered. Even in movies, the pictures are delivered. When you read a book, you have to make that movie in your head. So if you read a book and I read a book, we make two different movies in our heads, and we exercise our imagination in that way. Yeah. And imagination is, the source of everything. Yeah.
And it's interesting how I've heard when people talk about things like parallel thought, where a movie or something in media will be some piece of culture will be replicated, and sometimes it's not because they're trying to outdo each other. It's because they didn't know that the other studio or the other writer or whatever. You have a rash of zombie stories for a few years. You have a rash of hopeful stories. You have a rash of dark stories, and there's kind of this cultural awareness and cultural consciousness
yes,
that is there. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, that there seems to be this impulse around where it's certainly, I'm guessing that most people out there, they're not listening to this and saying, what are you talking about, people losing hope? It's like, no, they're aware, there's such a pressure. And I see this amongst young people now when they say, some of it's economic, of course, where it's like, what am I going to do am I ever going to move out on my own? Am I going to be able to build a life? And do I even go to college? I'm hearing people say that. And not in a lazy way at all, but in a smart way, where they're actually doing the math on those kinds of things and saying, "What's it going to be like for me?" So it is, it is something that a lot of people are facing and kind of asking some of these things that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, if I could have anything in the world, if I could have that book land in any way, it would be that it helps people to become who they are at their greatest, capacity. And most of us too, that will involve some kind of service, some kind of contribution. Our values. The real problem is when people are asking those questions, what they're really asking is, what's important? I can't figure it out anymore. I thought money was really, really important. And obviously it is really important, because I can't do these things that I want because I don't have the money. But money is not important, and that's been proven over and over and over again. What's really important is that you feel that you are moving forward in a life that you are creating, that you are excited about, that you feel connected to, and feel that you are offering your authentic self. And we all came here with gifts. We all came here with gifts. And, our education system is a bit of a mess, but imagine if the intention of education was to discover what is this child's gift and how do I support them to develop it. This idea of general studies, and even those, you're learning like this much of anything. It's better to, to take the thermometer and figure out where's the heat, where's this, what excites this particular soul.
What do you say to people who say, "Oh, I'm just not creative"? Because what you're talking about is everyone's an artist. And how do you break that down a little bit to say, what does that mean for people? Especially maybe someone who's like, I don't have a natural desire or skill or draw to what we might usually think of as what's the creative outlet, right?
Yeah. Most people think, well, I can't draw, or I can't sing, or I can't write songs, or I can't. They think of all the I can'ts because they've never explored the what do I want to do. And the exercise for that, because the book has exercises that I gave my acting students because they're in the business of creating life. So I thought, oh, well, I'm going to see if these lessons will help this person who says, I'm not really creative. Whether these exercises can excite them to creativity, because that's a lack of joy. Everybody knows when they're creative. If you give me that person who says, I'm not creative, I could talk to them for 15 minutes and discover where they have been creative in their lives. We have all been creative in our lives. And when they were creative, that's a whole exercise I give, is if you can't make a list of 10 things that bring you joy, make a list of 10 things from your childhood that you used to do and enjoy, because that's how disconnected people can be. I've given people that list, give me 10 things that bring you joy, and they can't answer. They go, I don't know. I don't know. I can't, I'm unhappy, So it's really about adjusting a person's vibration. People who say I'm not creative are generally pretty dissatisfied and unhappy with the status of their life. And if they took a look at that one creative thing they did, that feeling will arrive in them. It's like, yeah, I really liked that,
Yeah.
It's
interesting that one of the things that I do like in a book is anything, especially that has to do with inspiration or self-improvement or any of those things. I'm not trying to shoehorn you into a genre, I guess, but it's an inspirational piece of work. But you have a lot of exercises. In fact, you have some that are like sentence stems, we used to call them, or complete this sentence and come up with 10 examples and then 10 more, or whatever it is, to really push yourself to learn things about yourself. And I like that because there's plenty of books out there that are just like, here's my groovy thoughts, and there's a lot of cool thoughts that you share and experiences and stories. But the way that you include that, like you're teaching, and it makes a collaborative experience with the reader, which I think is really cool. I think is useful.
Well, in an early draft of the book, I went to the editor, and the editor said, Jocelyn, this is 2 books. You can't do a memoir and a teaching. They won't fit, that's a hybrid memoir, and that's almost impossible to achieve. And I went, okay, wrong editor. And then
I was going to say, did they read it? Because your thesis would go against that statement that you can't.
You can't, exactly. Well, the editor that I ended up with was brilliant because she saw it immediately, and she kind of it was sort of essays, a series of essays, and then all of the exercises came at the end. And she took the whole book apart and put it back together into 12 chapters and put the corresponding exercises at the end, and it worked. Prior to that, it was just slowing down the read. So that's structure, and there's structure in art, there's structure in editing, there's structure in all art, there's structure in life. The book talks about, sort of giving people examples of, okay, so you ask, what do you want? You find out what you want. How do you build a structure toward achieving it? Because we all need structure. I tell actors all the time, the more structure you have as an actor, the more freedom you will have in performance, because it's like having that underneath you, that trust that you can fly.
Well, I wanted to ask you, how would you define guides? You talk a little bit about having almost like a little voice inside yourself that will guide you at times, or you talk about having, and it just sounds like a very spiritual connection to a part of you that tells you what the right answer is to a conundrum or a life situation.
And I do call that, finding spirit, because, and anyone who's experienced that will talk about, I found spirit. I found this connection that I can trust and I believe in. There are lots of different ways. I don't have all the answers to what that is. But I do know that it moves in you. It's visceral. So sometimes it's talked about as your higher self. Sometimes it's talked about as you have guides that are basically you in other dimensions that are there to guide you.
That's interesting.
Yeah, parts of yourself that exist in other dimensions. There are, people call them angels, and people call them all kinds of entities. For me, it began in nature, where I started kind of hearing things, not like sentences, but whole concepts. And I talk about, nature and the power of nature. And the fact that we've become disconnected from nature is just the saddest thing in the world, because really we're here for nature to guide us. If you want to look at how it goes, turn your attention to nature, because a tree knows more about being a tree than we have any idea about being a human being. And just as we have communication with our beloved pets and animals, which is, a different kind of communication, we can have that communication with nature. We can have that communication with trees and with the wind. The wind is very spirited, and with water, which some people consider God. And the water has memory. There are all these things that are true scientifically that people are not aware of, that they could look for in nature. If we think about it, it's just a different language. Like, my dog has a different language. Here's where we share language physically and touch, and we look at each other, but really he has a different language. So I have to reach toward his language, just as, dogs reach toward your language. They're always trying to figure out, what do you want? What are you saying? What's the deal? And it's in question. They're questioning, what is it? And they will, we figure it out. When you question, you figure it out. Things come in. It's going to be okay. People hear that a lot. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay.
It's one of this fascinating thought experiment I heard once upon a time was the idea of what different worlds we all inhabit. Even, as people, we have different perceptions and experiences. But the example this person used was it was some training I went to. I can't remember the person's name, so I can't attribute it to them. But the idea was that, you can be sitting in a chair and maybe you're watching the World Series, right? And you're having that experience, and maybe there's a lot of emotional investment in whatever it is or whatever. And then next to you is a dog that is experiencing they're not really experiencing the TV because they don't care and they don't really see it the same way, but they're experiencing with their senses, especially smell, the whole maybe floor plan of the house that you're in, where they might be like, oh, over there, something spilled and over there. And then through the wall in the backyard, there might be like an anthill. And let's say the sprinklers kick on, and now that anthill, they're now experiencing their version of like the apocalypse or something, right?
Yeah.
So you've got all this happening within maybe a 5-foot circle, right? There's these three different dimensions that these beings are living in.
Yes.
And yet we're in the same space,
Yes, exactly. So if we, we tend to be so narrow in our thinking. And we can move on to talk about meditation, and the gift of meditation, which has been around thousands and thousands and thousands of years, is to just give us space to be. we're spiritual beings inside bodies, and we just haven't completely wrapped our mind around the fact that we're actually invisible.
Yeah.
And we have this avatar, this body, to do all kinds of miraculous things that we can see, that we can taste, touch, feel, think, and emotions. Those are all parts of the body. The spiritual being is just kind of using that to have an experience here on this beautiful planet. That's what living is really about, is experience. We want to have experience. Spirit wants to have experience, because you can't have experience if you're invisible.
Yeah.
So that's what we're reaching
It's
for.
a fascinating thing. Well, one of the things I talk about fairly often on the show, because I've been trained in it and worked with it a lot, which is DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy. And it just, as an upcoming episode is going to talk about it, it just made a cultural impact when the Hulk mentioned that he did DBT in the She-Hulk. Anyway, we have a whole episode about that. But DBT, one of the things they teach is a principle called wise mind. And the idea of wise mind is this idea that we have they often use the metaphor of a deep well inside ourselves. And if you drop a bucket into the well and you just pull it up randomly, it might be empty, and you make the mistake of thinking the well is empty. But it's like trying to get into your core self, the internal self. You reach into this wise mind, and the theory is that it'll answer most questions for you, is that there's a wisdom inside ourselves, if we trust it, to say, well, geez, what should I do? Well, I really kind of know what I want to do, or I know kind of how to get there. And some of the stories you tell in the book, it sounds like you have that experience of being like, what am I going to do? Well, I should do this. There's that wisdom.
Yeah, I think, and also when you create space through meditation, and my favorite meditation is to breathe into your heart, because it is amazing if you just stop for a minute and just breathe into your heart. You will connect to the bottom of that well. That's where it lives. That's where, we can feel it, because, we have to have some kind of feeling to locate things, but that's where it is in your heart. And if you just breathe into your heart and listen to your breathing, and that, because that will put you in present time, and it will slow your thinking. It's the thinking, it's the monkey mind that, goes to the past and goes to the future for worry. And why does it do that? It does that for experience. We all know people who just are dramatic, everything. We're just planning lunch, and somehow it becomes like, holy moly, this problem, that problem, this upset, that upset. What will happen if, I'm of an age where I let go of certain people. Like I don't want to spend my time doing that. And that's just a kind of an addiction to big feelings. I'm not alive if I'm not feeling well. And I noticed this with old people, my mother, she would get utterly dramatic about butter. And I realized it made her feel alive. Those big, exciting things make you feel alive. But there's another way to feel a different kind of alive, which is to breathe into your heart. And something happens where you just connect to yourself in space. That's being. We're human beings who don't know how to be, just be. And so when we breathe into our heart and we listen to our breath, we create space. And in that space is where impulse can meet us. And, there, as you were talking about films, or all these kinds of films, and all these kinds of films, there is impulse in the ethos that wants to be expressed, and they go to artists to do that. There's a wonderful story of a poet. I wish I'm going to have to look up her name, because I love to tell the story so much. but she was, I think in the Midwest, she was on a farm and she was out in the fields. And suddenly she felt this poem coming on and she started trucking. She started running toward the house to grab a paper and a pencil to write it down, because if she didn't, it would pass her and go on to another poet. And
That's
she
a really
got,
fascinating idea.
oh yeah, and she grabbed a pencil and she grabbed a paper and she started writing. And she felt like she was hauling it had just gone, and she grabbed the tail end of it and she was hauling it in from the tail end of it. And she was writing it down, and the poem came out backwards from the end of it to the front of it. And Tom Petty talks about driving, in a truck on tour to a gig and feeling a song coming on and having a whole conversation. Could you just hang out for a second? Because I'm almost at the motel. I'm going to be there, in another 20 minutes. I promise I'll write you down. No, can't. Okay. Pulling the car over, turning the light on, grabbing a pen. Hold on. I'll get it. Because he felt like if he did not, it was there, it was coming on. It's that moment of inspiration. And that if he did not grab it, it would pass him and go on to another songwriter. So when we begin to accept that there is advice, that there is inspiration, that there are things in the ethos that want to be expressed through art, when we accept that, more of that is allowed to come into our life. And creating space with meditation is creating a safe place for those arrivals. So you meditate like that, you create a space, then you ask questions, then you wait for answers. And then you don't accept the answer until it's really exciting to you. And then you go, oh, okay.
I like one of the things that you talk a lot about is the importance of discomfort and then embracing things that I don't know, and that it's okay not to know them for some amount of time, right? You can sit there with a lack of knowledge and learn, rather than either pretending that you know or trying to,
or dismissing it because you have to protect yourself, that you don't feel smart enough. So I'm going to dismiss. That's stupid. That's judging it. Yeah. So, what's the question?
Oh, well, I was curious about that role. When you mentioned the role of discomfort, it made me think of a couple of things. Yeah.
Well, it's so important because we spend so much of our life uncomfortable. I just became a grandmother for the first time, and I have a 3-week-old baby boy.
Congratulations.
And thank you. He's so lovely, and he's such a teacher. So discomfort, everything is uncomfortable to him, but he's just beginning to wake up, and I said to my daughter, oh, he's waking up, he's spending more time awake. She said, yeah, he doesn't quite know what to do with it. That's why he wants to nurse all the time, because he knows I can do that. I do that really well. I'm a champion nurser. I'm a champion sleeper. I know these things. What do I do now that I'm awake? What am I doing? Because he can't do very much. So he's uncomfortable. This morning she sent me a video of him taking his first bath, and it was wonderful to see his interest. She was talking to him. She was going, yeah, this is the water. It's kind of like being in the womb. And he was kind of looking around and going, wow, this is different. What's going on here? Not necessarily comfortable. We go into our everything we do that we grow from is uncomfortable. You go to the first grade. Nobody wants to walk into that classroom with people. They're uncomfortable. I don't know anybody. We don't really want to do anything because it's uncomfortable, particularly starting things. So we have to encourage ourselves and others that, that's good. That's good to be uncomfortable. To overcome discomfort is to grow.
It's interesting because that's one of the times we learn the most rapidly is in infancy, that our brain is growing quickly, and from that to toddlerhood. I mean, we're learning to move, talk, essentially everything. I had never thought of that as a healthy discomfort before, but it makes a lot of sense. when you put it that way.
But the most important thing, Dwight, is to acknowledge it for others and to acknowledge it for ourselves. So with children, we go, yeah, that's different, isn't it? I know. Are you worried about doing that? Yes, I get it. That you have a healthy conversation, but I think we're just going to go ahead anyway, and see what happens, and the same thing with ourselves, to acknowledge, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. That doesn't mean I have to live in discomfort forever. That doesn't mean, I have to retreat from what I'm doing. It simply means I'm uncomfortable. And, but I think, once we say it, it's easier to move past it.
You talk a lot about relationships in this book. And one of the things is you're very open about your relationship with your family, your brother, your dad, and particularly I found very touching how open you were about your experience with your mother. And it was very interesting to read about when you decided to observe her as a person instead of looking at her just as your mother, where you sat back and kind of mindfully observed what she was doing. How you had different insights into her problematic
when
behaviors.
I created that space for it. Yeah, we get caught up in relationships and we develop habits. We develop bad habits and habits that are difficult for our loved ones to put up with. And when observation, I talk a lot in the book about observation because it's an extraordinary experience and it really helps us to grow, to learn, to observe without judgment. Is a practice, and not many people teach it. It's definitely artists do it either naturally or they're taught to go look at things and not to reinforce what you already know, but to look for what you don't know. And to do that again, boy, you have to create space. So I had a lot of issues with my mom. That made me sad. It's incredible to me that at my age, we're still, that doesn't go away. If the child, misses some important ingredient in a loving family, they will be seeking that out for a long, long time, possibly a lifetime. So meditation helped me to observe her without judgment. And in so doing, I also saw the habits. So as the space is creating, you're moving back these habits, and these habits become more visible, like how judgmental I was of her, how angry I was with her, how I wanted to be able to say, see, you did that. I knew that and so I see, and you did it, and I'm putting it on my scoreboard. We have scoreboards in relationships. This is my reasons for hating you.
Sometimes it becomes like almost a pain off, to where it's like, here's my pain. It's more valid and justified. No, mine's more valid and justified. And worse, by the way.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's tallies going on, right? So to be able to have a meditation practice that allowed me to stand in the kitchen while she was having a meltdown, one of her big dramas, and just hold space for her and for me in that room, not as mother and daughter, as to what's happening here. Well, there's a woman on that side of the room who is really unhappy and in pain. She's suffering. That's suffering. That's suffering to be that dramatic and upset and carrying on. And there's me, and I don't usually just see her in that way. I feel justified in my anger toward her when she behaves like this. Mm-hmm. And instead I thought, what's happening? What is this really about? Why is she so unhappy? And so, it's a very, very, very powerful exercise for artists and everyone.
Was it challenging to bring up those things and write them in the book, to when you were talking about some of those experiences with your mother and really laying it all out there?
Well, it was cathartic, I think. I wanted to be honest. And I think, we're all so connected that when one of us is honest about our experiences, five other people go, thank you, because I've had that experience as well.
That's
And
I like that mindset. That's a good mindset.
yeah, so I think it's important for us that, and this is this huge reach for authenticity today. People really want to be authentic. They want to be around authentic people. And what that means is, the ability to be yourself and to allow others to be themselves. And observation helps that. What I was going to say before was, it brings us closer to humanity to just look, just observe a homeless person. And what will happen is, we don't want to look at homeless. I'm bi-coastal, but I spent a lot of time in New York, and you see people suffering in New York on the streets of New York, and you walk by because you don't want to, because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to look. I don't want to exchange conversation. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to see that. I don't want that in my world. And yet that is in our world. And we have to remember that we live in a world of dark and light. We're never going to get rid of all the dark. It's how we deal with the dark, So it's the dark and the light that created everything, It's that energy up against each other. So when you're able to observe and when you're able to accept, the discomfort of someone else suffering and just observe them and, maybe ask them a question and look them in the eye, you will change that person. You will change them because they've been seen. We all just want to be seen. Everybody wants to be seen,
When there's a word that comes up when they do research into resiliency to neglect, to abuse, to trauma. And the word is interested. They say that when you encounter people who are interested in you, especially as a child, that even one interested person can amplify someone's ability to recover and heal from trauma significantly, even if there's just really one person they remember. You read about Gracie, obviously. That's who I'm thinking of as I say that, reading your story. But just how much you're talking about then also being that mentor for people to say, can I be
just being interested? Being interested. We're not taught some basic things as human beings that we really need. And to be interested in your marriage, to this, well, what's going on here? How do we make this better? Let's talk about it. How are you feeling? And then creating the safe space for that person to talk about it. This is the whole basis of therapy. And I think people are really struggling with mental health today because of the pandemic and because of the state of politics and because of the state of our leadership. We don't have people out there showing us exciting ways that it can go, which, in the course of history, may be a really flat period right now in that regard of inspiration, which is another reason I wanted to write the book.
It's an interesting thing to say, how often do we really address some of the most important things? I produce and I'm a co-host on a podcast put out by the Wiseman Method Detox Facility in LA. And so it's based all around asking questions around substance abuse. And it's amazing because the main thing we come to a lot is the idea of self-medication for mental health issues, which one theory is that that's all addiction kind of comes down to its roots of that.
Yeah.
And yet, we look at that and we look at people literally dying from that kind of expression. And then also, as I say a lot on here, the danger of mental health problems, the bigger, more common danger isn't death, which is one of the biggest dangers, suicide or addiction or other things that can kill us. But much more frequently than that is the quality of life, the happiness of life being damaged and surviving, like physically surviving, the heart still beats and the brain still processes or receives oxygen and we're alive. But yet there's an unhappiness that people walk around with, and trauma that people don't address.
Yes. And it's happening everywhere to too many people. I honestly believe in my depths of my being that our purpose in life is to bring joy to ourselves and to others.
Mm.
There's no reason why we can't do that. And
Yeah.
and that doesn't take money, and that doesn't take, it takes an adjustment of heart, really, and
When
an acceptance that we all have
yeah.
something to offer.
One of the interesting things is that with your exercises and your stories and talking a lot about mindful meditation, that's one of the things, speaking of discomfort, that even though it's conceptually simple and pretty soon starts to bear fruit and help, and it's one of the biggest things you can do for free to actually help your mental health, your emotional health, your physical, cardiovascular sometimes, and other things like that, lowers your blood pressure. But people don't like to do it. It's hard to get into. And I thought it was interesting. You mentioned that it wasn't easy for you to get into meditation, that it was complicated or
It was
hard, seemed
really
hard at
difficult.
first. Yeah.
I didn't want to do it. I didn't want
Nobody
to
does. Trust
meditate.
me.
Yeah, I thought and mostly I thought because I'm not going to be good at it. I'm not going to be good at it. And then, with mindfulness, you learn that there's lots of different meditations. The reason I go to mindfulness is because mindfulness talks about there's no wrong way to meditate. So, part of it is the judgment that we put our throughs while we're meditating,
Right
but
now, I'm screwing up
just
meditation.
yeah, oh, yeah, I can't. I'm thinking I'm not doing. That's not right. I was meditating, and now I've been thinking about this problem for the last 2 minutes. I didn't even realize it. All of that is like just you learn to just go, oh, thinking and go back to your breath. Oh, judging and go back to your breath. And it is a great teacher of where your monkey mind wants to go, and a teacher that you are not that monkey mind. You are not those thoughts. You are the observer of those thoughts. If people have a hard time wrapping themselves around, the fact that we're spiritual beings and we're invisible beings inside these bodies.
It's
So that helps. It's like, oh, I get it. But that's big. That's hard. That's very expansive idea of life on Earth.
I
Um,
I heard one of the most interesting aspects of meditation. I heard once from a meditation teacher was she said that everybody starts out by deep breathing. And she said, there are some of you out there, it was a training, and she was putting everyone through a meditation exercise. And she just offhand said, oh, there's some of you out there who maybe get distracted by your own breathing, or maybe you have issues where deep breathing is not soothing to you. If that's true, just breathe. It's okay. Just pay attention to your breathing, even if it's
yes,
your normal breathing. And that opened up this part of my mind that's like, wait, this isn't like a secret magic ritual that you have to do 6 steps in order. It's mostly where your attention lies. Am I observing my own self in that moment? Am I living in the present moment as much as possible? Or as you put it, if I'm distracted, do I come back and say, it's okay
yeah,
that I was distracted? Of course I was. I'm a human being. Let
yeah.
me just move on and reorient myself if I have to. And if I have to do
And
that a
that's
hundred
like a
times, that's okay.
muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're flexing the muscle every time. That is the muscle of meditation is acceptance and going back to the breath, acceptance and going back to the breath, because really we're creating this life one step at a time. We're creating our own life. And part of the difficulty of meditation is part of the difficulty a lot of people are having right now, which is you can call it discipline, except everybody will run in the opposite direction. It's really a matter, discipline. I'm like, I'm out on discipline. But discipline is really, what I'm talking about is following through with your own choices, being your own best advocate. We're talking about 5 minutes a day. So, you get up, you wash up and you sit for 5 minutes. Just do 5 minutes. And every time we ask ourselves to do something like that, I am going to practice 5 minutes every morning just for the next week, and see how I feel. every time we rise to that occasion and we check that off our list, Tuesday I did it, Wednesday I did it, Thursday I did, we gain more confidence in ourselves and that we can live our lives the way we want to.
It's interesting because it builds on itself too to handle other problems. Like imagine having 5 minutes in the morning to just sit and meditate. And I think, if you're someone out there who's thinking like, I don't know if I have 5 minutes with everything going on in the morning, then you think to yourself, why don't I have 5 minutes? I probably actually do if I look for it hard enough. Or if I don't, maybe I should. That's the thing that I think is very hard is, do I give myself and do I structure my life around having 5 minutes here and there, right? And saying, I have to, I have to get here, I have to get there. And thinking, well, where's the 5 minutes I can carve out? Is it in my car? Is it over here? Is it on a lunch break? Is it on whatever it is, to say I want to include that in my life is a decision that then it can also waterfall or into other decisions.
Yeah.
I wanted to, there's a quote, if you don't mind, I'm going to read, I'm curious about this. It ties in, I think, to what we're trying to talk about with mindfulness, is it's not about being more complex. It's about trying to simplify. So you're actually talking about acting in this part specific, but it says, good acting is easy. It's just a little difficult trusting in the simplicity. Humanity has long been in the business of complicating things. And I thought that was very profound to me. I'm curious some of your thoughts about where you're at when you're sharing something like that and writing something like that.
Well, I could take that goes all the way to, it goes from every day, how we complicate things. Let's start with this. Behind every lie is a complication, or surrounding every lie is a complication. So when you look at just the easy target right after the elections, when you look at the state of politics, you can tell it's just riddled with lies because it's so complicated. So, politics is very easy if you would just simplify it, just take all the votes. Who got the most votes? That's it. Done. We're done. You got the most votes. You didn't. Give him the same amount of money as him and say, okay, this is your money for your campaign. That's how much money you get. Let's see how you do with it. You know what I mean? Simple. All these, they're very simple solutions to life, but we complicate it. So if we don't want to do something, if we're lying about something, we will build if we're lying to ourselves about something, we will build a bunch of lies around it, justifications, things that are not quite true, because that holds it in place. Lies hold things and it keeps things there because we're like, what's going on? We got to figure it out. And you could take that back to, the beginning of time spiritually and say, well, how did we build a planet and, evolve life on the planet? We complicate, we're spiritual beings. If we want something, we could manifest it immediately. So in order not to manifest immediately, we have to complicate things. Some people believe that. I think it's very interesting. Yeah. Otherwise, we're so powerful, we could just have everything we want, but then we wouldn't have a game, would we? So,
and how much of that complication is talking ourselves out of the self-trust, right? Of how can I think some of it also comes from experiences people have where I did my best judgment and it blew up in my face. And so I can't trust myself anymore, rather than saying I'm allowed to choose something that, and, going to the theory of discomfort and saying, if I can observe the blowing up in my face, it could even be beneficial, even if I have to really work hard at finding a purpose, to move from, even if my purpose is simply watching myself survive. Right.
Yeah.
It's everything. I had a boss who used to say everything is grist for the mill, so to speak. Everything is useful if we use it, if we try to use it.
Yeah.
And that's not to take away people's suffering. I mean, everybody who has heard me talk about this knows I'm not an advocate of prescribing things that help me deal with things to others if they are. Well, I mean, for example, what I mean by that is If I tell someone, oh, there's a purpose for everything, it's like, well, I don't know if they believe that. I don't know if they need to believe that. But to say we can use anything if we choose to is, like, to me, a little more useful to say that. It's
Yes.
not to say that I'm glad this, in fact, maybe the suffering shouldn't have happened. It often shouldn't have happened
Yeah.
if people were acting right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is, I do believe, and I think anyone who looks at their life can spot it, that, out of some very dreary times or some very, oh my God, I didn't get the part. But if you had gotten the part, then this thing proves itself down the line. If you'd gotten that part, you wouldn't be free to do this thing. That's just a basic example of it. But I pretty much trained myself for when things happen, including illness. It's like, okay, what are you trying to tell me? What's going on? What do I need to pay attention here? That there's signs to grow, that there's some growth and some understanding to be had that we don't quite get, rather than just, once you're a victim to something, I have problems with that, because once people are like, well, they did this to me and he did this to me and she did this to me, then you're done, Whereas if you say, this happened and it was really traumatizing and made me very unhappy, what could I do about it? And that's when people start, I'm going to start, a foundation I'm going to, so it's more active. What can I do about it is the question. We can't take it away. It happened. It was traumatizing. It was awful. It seems like, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but perhaps it was, but there's something to be learned.
Well, and
there's always something.
And it kind of, I think you just outlined for me the difference between obsession and observation, right? In a way, is like, do I notice something hurt, and do I notice it was wrong and unfair, and then move in there and build a house and live there?
Yeah.
Or do I notice it and say, now what am I going to do? I've been damaged. I've been traumatized. Maybe another person, as you put it, sometimes there's people I have to trim or lower my exposure to if it was a especially toxic experience. But now what? Like, what else do I do with that? What kind of a person do I want to shape that? As they say, becoming a victim to a survivor to thriver. Those are terms we use in trauma, right? Trauma recovery and abuse recovery. It's very fascinating to get into. A lot of it really comes down to trying to allow yourself to experience being yourself. That sounded like a little roundabout, but I hope that made sense.
Yes, and also observing feelings. Observing feelings is as good as observing your breath, because if you can observe feelings just by the nature of kind of commanding yourself, wow, I'm really crying. This really hurts. My heart is, just go through a checklist and observe it. Just in the nature of stepping aside to look at it, you have separated yourself out from it. We are not our feelings, our feelings, and they're not bigger than we are. We can observe them and recognize them for, their effect on our nervous system, really. We have this nerve. What is emotion? It's a big effect on your nervous system.
Well, and I like how you pointed that out before, as all of this is tied into, it's all internal, right? That's why even in my industry, I hear people talk about mental health and physical health. Is this mental or physical? Is it psychological or physical? Emotional or physical? And it's like all three of those things, emotional, psychological, mental, and all their crossover areas, they're all physical. They take place inside the body, the brain, the heart, everything is contained inside of us. And so they're all, a part of us. There's not like, oh, well, that's just anxiety, so it doesn't count. It's like, dude, people die from anxiety. It's very, very real. And so important to be observing, as you put it, and kind of learning from that and moving through our lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is we could go on, and we could take as long as it takes to read the book. I made all these notes. I'm like, got to ask about that. It's like, oh wait, it's like it's like too much to have time to do. So
I love that.
Grateful for the time we've had. I always like to ask people a couple things. One is to tell us about how to, find you and the things that you're doing, and we'll share that in a second. But first, I always ask people about whether or not they have a charity or a nonprofit or something they would suggest people should look up or get into. I say almost always. I mean, I've never had anyone reject that question. But anyway, so I always like to ask people what they would share as far as something that people ought to be aware of and maybe help out with.
Well, I don't have a specific charity or to mention, but I would say this: I am passionate about arts in education because it is the arts that stimulate our imagination, and it is our imaginations that create our future. So when we took away, the arts from education in this country, we did tremendous damage. That's just, So anyway, that's my passion, is to bring the arts back to education, to reform education, really.
How do you find people getting involved in that? Do you find like a local grassroots effort of helping out at a school or trying to teach and volunteer, or more like letter writing macro level
national
stuff?
Yeah, letter writing macro level stuff is very, we all do that. We can change things. But Google is the researcher's greatest friend. I love Google because, you get all kinds of things. You just have to point your intention in a certain direction. And it's almost like the universe starts bringing you things to look at. Well, did you see this? Well, did you see that?
It's
so
fascinating when you are observing and you open your mind to finding things to be involved in. Yeah.
To what comes in. So, yeah. Arts and education is a big one.
That's fascinating. And I think you just mentioned Google, and it made me think of a couple of things that I had read about recently. There's an organization in California, for example, that you can go and donate anything, almost anything. They'll take like metal stuff, carpet, whatever it is, materials that and even old like devices and things. And once a week, they open up this warehouse to kids that can come in and they can pick things to make an art project out of it or something. And
wow.
Even just down the road from where I'm at, they have a couple organizations where you can donate to similar things like a thrift store for artistic purposes. And
really, I love that. You don't know the name of that place, the one
in California, I don't know. I do know that there's one here in Utah. I live about a half an hour away from Salt Lake City in Utah, and it's called the Clumsy Octopus. That one is, and they do sell things to support, whatever. But they there's things there you wouldn't find anywhere else. But yeah, I don't have that organization's off the top of my head. I'll have to dig that up and find that.
Yeah, me either. I wish I did, but certainly,
Google
donating
Art Council, yeah,
Art Council, arts and education. I'd start with arts and education, and then nonprofits for education, art and education, but also this donating art.
Well, and I've come across, people who are teaching, if you look at like a prep teacher or even a full-time art teacher, I've heard stories of places where people's budget for the year is like $100 or something. And so going to your local elementary school,
your local school.
Hey, I have a bunch of stuff. Do you want this stuff? Or, sometimes you have to donate. I got some paints. I got some markers. Just assume that whoever's teaching your kids is out of that stuff. And that if they have it, they're buying it themselves.
Yes. They're out of school supplies. So, I think your local schools are a wonderful place. And go to the other side of town. Your local schools in the other side of town, because on this side of town, they've got everything they need. And that side of the town, they have nothing. So
that's a good point.
I would donate money and supplies. I think is great, and time.
So what are you up to, and where do people find you?
Well, I'm here.
Not physically, listeners. Don't go by, they buy these celebrity maps in California with people's homes on them, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I can be found at the Jocelyn Jones Studio, either .com, which is where the website is, or on Instagram, on Facebook, Jocelyn Jones Acting Studio. But that's basically how to find me, is Jocelyn Jones Studio. The book is on Amazon. And we have the exciting thing, I've been working for 3 years on a 16 series masterclass for actors. So we're very excited about that. It features 16 actors, in their working actors. It's a very advanced scene class, and it shows people kind of what goes on in acting classes. We have some series now on acting classes that are just embarrassing to me. That's not really, acting classes are not that dysfunctional. It's amusing on television, but actors need acting class. They need acting class because, a musician can practice on their instrument, but an actor needs a theater and other actors and material, and they need stuff to practice their work. So that should come out in the beginning of the year, and it's taken 3 years to edit and pull together.
Yeah, people just find that
big project
on the website. Basically, they
can find it on the website and see what's coming up there.
I hadn't thought of that before, but you're right. There's so many depictions of acting classes, and they're used as it's one thing to poke fun at an industry, but very interesting. I wonder if that goes back to some of the lack of appreciation of the arts, of like, oh, here's a silly thing, bunch of people sitting around learning to, and it's like, yeah, when's the last time you turned on a movie or TV show or went to a play? Come on, you want them to know what they're doing, don't you? I mean, anyway, that's just kind of an interesting thing you mentioned where,
it's a funny thing with silly acting classes. There's in certain classes, in certain types of classes, certainly acting classes, the teachers get a little guru-like. And, the actors want that. They love that. They love to put the teacher on the pedestal, the wise teacher things. And then they take it. I mean, I've been in these acting classes and they take advantage of students, it's a power thing. So you have to be very careful, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to make the documentary, to show this is a teacher's job. A teacher's job is to really lead you to your own understandings and to see you and to encourage you and to tell you what you're doing right so that you can repeat it, and then tell you things that, more opportunities are out there for you to look for in terms of choices, rather than here's the way you should do it. Well, here's an opportunity perhaps you missed, but it's very important when you're teaching to tell people what they're doing right. People may go, oh, okay. So they keep all that stuff and then they learn the next step.
Approaching it like a teacher, right? Instead of a self-ego stroke. But
exactly.
It's wonderful stuff. I'm going to mention the name again. It's Artist: Awakening the Spirit Within. Is Amazon the best place for people to buy it for you, or is there a different place that's better for you? I mean, some people may, for their own purposes, buy it from independent bookstores and things. I'm very pro that. But on the other hand, I'm just wondering, for you as the author, is there a better place?
It's pretty much available, anywhere you buy books. You can request it. Amazon does have a corner, and there are reasons they have a corner. And, for the author, they are the best.
Okay.
Really,
I always ask just in case, sometimes people have a different deal or something. So whatever's better.
Yeah. Sometimes people sell off their website, which is, it's important, I think, to have. Yeah.
So, well, great. And for everybody out there as well, you can also follow us. You can go to @BreakABrain on Twitter, or at Brainiacs Ahoy on Instagram, or Facebook as well, facebook.com/BreakABrain. And, of course, you can always get involved with the show by supporting over on our Patreon and get all the fun bonuses, including the video of this conversation, as well as all of our conversations, not just the audio, as well as bonus episodes at patreon.com/brokenbrain. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Dwight. I really, really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.
Did you know that a high amount of therapists learn the techniques they use in therapy within the first 3 to 5 years of their practice and then stick with that? Well, hopefully we're looking to be a little bit more flexible and to learn and to accentuate and to add tools to our toolbox all the time. You're familiar with EMDR, of course. You either do it, you've used techniques, and you may have even, like myself, learned techniques that you later found out were related to EMDR, which were very effective. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy is helping so many people to process trauma. If you have not been certified or learned how to use it as a therapist, you really owe it to yourself and your clients to look into this and to consider it. Carol Miles is a licensed clinical social worker who's put together Three Rivers Training Center, and they are now sponsors of the Broken Brain. So you can learn more about their upcoming trainings by going to carolmiles.com and clicking on trainings. You can learn new skills. You can learn techniques that are going to help your clients to process trauma. You can also get your continuing education units, as licensure renewal is up in many states in the United States anyway. Let's all get better. Break out of those old habits and use some new techniques.